All right. So look, we generally run a refresher session now at the beginning of each teaching session on Zoom. Previously, we used to actually have quite distinct sort of beginners workshop, advanced workshop, ideas for teaching and learning workshop around Zoom. And I guess it's been going long enough for a lot of instructors and things that it's sort of consolidated down now into a sort of a refresher where we try and look at any new features, etc. And if people have specific things that they would like help with, then we kind of arrange a one-on-one and go from there. But I'll start with kind of the general stuff that I look at, and then if you want to sort of narrow that down more, we can get into those things. All right. So look, when we talk about the Zoom integration, and I'll share my screen here. There are three kind of terms that we usually throw in the mix. One of them is the Zoom desktop application. And when we talk about that, we're looking for the icon on any CSU computer with Zoom on it. And when we actually run that, it opens up this particular boxed window. And this is a feature that sits, it's not in the Zoom meeting itself like we're in, but these are the settings that kind of sit behind it, and it will give you access to changing some of the features in there. The most important part about the Zoom desktop application really is in the top right-hand corner where your profile picture is. So for me, I have Beaker from the Muppets, for example. If you left click on that, it'll bring down a drop-down menu. And arguably the most important thing that you need to know about this is that this is where you check for updates on whether or not your Zoom is the current version. And this is particularly important because this product is quite prolific in terms of its updates. They have a new one at least once a month, sometimes multiple times a month. Most of those are not critical in terms of stopping you from using features of the tool, but once every 6 months or so, they will have a feature that's released that if you're not updated to a current version, neither you nor your students will be able to use that feature. Now, one example of that is the whiteboards tool. We'll have a look at that in a little bit. But when they updated to include the new Zoom whiteboards tool, people that hadn't updated to the latest version using this particular option could only watch. They couldn't participate with the whiteboards. So that's just one example of why checking for updates periodically is important. And the easiest way to do it is to click on the Zoom desktop app, click on your profile picture top right, check for updates. And what you will see, in this case, even for myself, who updates this thing pretty much every week, there's a new version available. So the most current version that they're talking about here is 5.15.3. And if you have a look at your own, you'll probably notice that it's some numbers behind that. The updating process takes 20 or 30 seconds, but you can't update Zoom when you're in an actual Zoom meeting. It'll pause it, and then as soon as you get out of the Zoom meeting, it'll run the update, and then it'll be done, and the next time you jump in, it'll be there. So you can also scroll through that and see what are the new things available in this. In this case, this is nothing that's particularly interesting to me, but bug issues and other stuff. Okay, that's fine. Nothing really huge for me. And if I scroll down to some of the older versions, still shared content, pinching and scrolling, no, not really all that interesting. Sharing multiple desktop screens. Anyway, you can kind of go through that if you're so inclined, but you'll see that it's paused and it won't update for me until we get out of this meeting today. So that's the update feature, and it's pretty much the only reason that I talk to people about the desktop app is that you can go into your profile picture and not just change that if you wanted to, which you could do by looking at your profile and changing the picture, but really it's about the updates. So we don't really use any of the other features of this particular aspect of Zoom because we use ours within our Blackboard sites, our I2 subject sites, or we go directly to the CSU Zoom portal, and that's the next thing I want to look at. So when we talk about the CSU Zoom portal, I'm talking about this particular website, charleston.zoom.us. Now, am I right in thinking, have you got a copy of the Zoom quick guide that we put together?
I would have originally. I'm sure I have it.
Let me grab a copy and I'll drop it in the chat for you, just so you've got something to refer to if you need to. Desktop tools, Zoom, and we've got a quick guide for Blackboard, which I'll put in there. We've got a quick guide for the Zoom portal and a quick guide that we also provide to students for those interested. So you can download those from the chat if you're interested. All right, so when we talked about this is the desktop app and what we use for that with its updates. Now we're going to talk about the Zoom portal, which is the web address or the back end of Zoom at charlessturt.zoom.us. And when you click on sign in, it's going to ask for your CSU login, basically, to get in here. So if we click on sign in, which is what you're going to be doing most of the time in here, it will bring up this particular interface, which will give you a summary of your meetings that you've got coming up and what dates. You'll also see a button in the top right-hand corner that'll allow you to schedule meetings from the back here if you need to. And it's also where you can access things like your settings sitting behind Zoom. And all of your recordings ultimately will end up here. So when we say recordings, it's recordings made in meetings where you are the host. Now there's a distinction to be made there between I2 subject sites where you've been added as an instructor and the recordings sit inside the subject site inside the Zoom tool. If you haven't scheduled the meeting in the first instance, created it, then the recordings for those rooms will not appear in your recordings folder in here. They'll be in the subject site, but they're not going to appear in your personal recordings folder unless you are the one who created the meeting in the first instance. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Good morning, Ruth. And we're just looking at the back end at the Zoom portal settings.
Sorry.
Yeah, all right, not a problem.
Yes.
So this is look, I could spend hours talking about the back end of the Zoom portal, but I'm just going to touch on a few standout points for me. One of them is the section that will display by default is the meetings section, which will show you everything coming up. And meetings that you've set, you'll see here there's a camera icon that's next to the meeting that I'm currently in, showing that it's going on. So you can't change the settings of a meeting that you're in currently. You would need to actually stop the meeting and go in. But also, what we're going to find if we go into a meeting that's coming up, if I click on the title, we can edit the details that we have around the meeting by going to the bottom and clicking on edit. But some of the things that you might want from here, for example, if you needed to quickly copy the link to give to someone else for a Zoom meeting, you can get it from there. If you needed to add the Zoom meeting into your Outlook calendar, if it wasn't there for whatever reason, you can click on this Outlook calendar ICS and it will add that file into your Outlook calendar, block out that slot in your calendar. And also, if you needed to allow other participants to add other hosts, for example, to the meeting, alternative hosts, at the moment, I can't do that. I need to edit the meeting. And then apart from changing times and titles and all the rest of it, down the bottom under options, you'll also find alternative hosts right at the bottom. And that's where you can add other CSU Zoom account holders. So this is assuming that they've signed into the Zoom portal at least once. You can add their email address here and they will then be an alternative host for the Zoom meeting. So we've been talking about the desktop app and the CSU portal. What we're going to talk about in a few minutes, particularly, is how Zoom works within our subject sites. And most of the time, to be honest, that's what most academics are interested in, less so than the other stuff. So what I'm saying is that if you're creating your own Zoom meetings in the back end through the portal here and you want to add other people in, etc., this is the way that you're going to need to do it, by editing the meeting, opening the options, adding in the alternative hosts. All of the options that we get in here, such as turning on automatic recording. So as soon as the meeting starts, it starts recording. And when you finish, it finishes and then sends you the link to the recording. All of that kind of stuff is turned on here through the options. But there are also questions around automatic recordings that most instructors generally want to think about, such as if students join a meeting, if they can get into a meeting before you go, as in this first option, allowing participants to join that meeting anytime, even if you're not there. So let's say you're not there in the meeting, it starts, two students jump in and they start talking about highly personal stuff. And as soon as they've jumped in, they're being automatically recorded without their permission. So that's why usually what we recommend is that you choose one of these options only, automatically record or allow participants to join anytime. So if you have that option unchecked, turning on automatic recordings means you have to turn up first and then the recording will start. That's okay. Or if you want the students to have access to the room to use for themselves, study groups or whatever the case may be, just make sure you don't have automatic recording turned on. So it's kind of a one or the other type scenario, really. Okay, what else do we have going on in our meeting settings? By default, security settings at CSU have a waiting room turned on when you create a Zoom room. So that will mean that authenticated users pass straight through into the meeting. So if they've logged in through the subject site, students, for example, that go in through their I2 site and join a Zoom meeting, they'll pass straight through into the meeting. But if they've just clicked on a hyperlink through their email or something, they're not going to be logged into CSU systems and they will be put into the waiting room for the Zoom meeting. And then you will have to admit them. So for example, when both of you this morning came straight into the Zoom meeting because you've logged in to a CSU system somewhere, it's picked up that information and it passed you straight in. And I can see, for example, if I look at if I just move this across, for example, you can see in our participant list, for example, Ruth's got the word guest next to her name and you don't, Catherine. So that's an indication that you've logged into those systems and Zoom's picked up that you're a registered CSU user, whereas Ruth, for example, has probably clicked on the link to join this meeting in a calendar somewhere or a PD session somewhere, and it hasn't picked up that she's a CSU staff person, just a guest. You'll see the same thing with your students when you're looking at the participant panel inside Zoom. And just to show you again, when we look at a live Zoom meeting, for example, I have my chat and my participants joined to my main kind of Zoom window, but you can separate them by clicking on this drop down next to each and clicking on pop out, at which point I can then move my participant list wherever I want to, drag it out if I need to, and I can do the same with the chat pop out. And then the chat is a box that I can put wherever I want to. And this is basically useful for you, particularly if you've got multiple monitors and you want to actually multiple screens going and you want to actually control where you can see each different bit, the video versus the text versus the pods. Now we're going to get into the Zoom interface and its features in a minute, but whilst I'm looking at the chat and the participants here, let's look at participants for a minute. The participant panel is a really powerful thing. For instructors, it's probably the closest thing to a classroom management tool that you have with Zoom, because it gives you features like, for example, being able to mute everyone's microphones if they're not already muted. It gives you the ability to can see at a snapshot whether you're recording, for example. You can see the little picture of the cloud up the top there with the red dot in it. That shows that that's up here next to my name. That shows that we're recording to the cloud. The picture with the green arrow in it next to my name shows that this person is sharing their screen. And you can see when I'm talking, the microphone's going up and down. I know the icons are small, but can you see what I'm talking about there? Yep. So that instantly at a snapshot, I can confirm that things are working the way I want them to. I'm sharing something, I'm talking, it's recording. I feel all right at the moment about that. And my webcam is on, hence the unredlined camera. What you also have control over as the host is when you hover your mouse over individual participant names and click on the three dots, we see a whole range of different options for what we can do with those users. So for example, I can elevate someone's role in a meeting and make them a co-host. So for example, I can make Catherine a co-host, and you'll see now that we've got co-host here. For me in my meetings, that means that she's now able to share content if she needed to, and she can also demote, promote other users that have a lower role, for example, students, guests, other people, anyone not the host, basically. And again, with the three dots, I can remove those, and Catherine would then go back to being a standard user in the meeting. Our other options that we have, only the host or the co-host has the ability to rename participants. Students used to have the ability to rename themselves, for example, call themselves whatever they wanted to, however they were going to appear in a Zoom meeting. That's been turned off. You can imagine the type of things that people might call themselves, etc., in a meeting when given control over their profile name. So that feature's turned off. We have the ability to also remove participants and put them in the waiting room, or to kick them out of the room altogether. And I hope that that scenario never crops up for you, but the easiest way to manage people in a room for whatever reason is that there are lots of different scenarios for why you might have users needing to be moved back into the waiting room. I think the most common one that I see is things like interviews or catch-ups with students that need to be one-on-one, and someone else has jumped into the room. Well, the easy part is, look, I need to move this person out of that space until I'm ready for them. And you can simply do that through the participant panel. So it's pretty good. Now, if we have a look at the chat panel in comparison, I might minimize this stuff in the background so that we're not so busy. Chat is probably the most utilized feature in a Zoom meeting, apart from someone actually talking in a microphone. You're going to get students back channeling, other people back channeling through the chat pod, and its functionality has improved markedly over time. It allows us to do a whole bunch of things, but arguably the most important one that we're going to be working with a lot of the time is text. So we do our normal text typing stuff in here. And that message, as we can see from the blue box, is going to everybody, but I can also send targeted messages. So for example, if I wanted to say hi just to this person, I can then choose from the participant list in the room. I could send that to Ruth, and you can see that we're getting status here, direct message. And when I click send, that will only go through to her chat, and you get the confirmation there. She'll get the same thing with a red message in her chat going just to her. Direct messages are not captured in recordings. If you're curious, they're not captured in transcripts. And again, what usually happens when someone does use direct messaging is that they've forgotten that they're not talking to everybody, and they start typing in there when they actually meant they needed to reset that back to everyone. So that can happen quite often. Most of the areas in the chat area are customizable in terms of being able to drag them out. So you can make your chat area bigger, which is handy. I think there's a 2,000 character limit for each post that you put in the chat. So you can actually put quite a lot of text in there. It also acts as a drag and drop area. So if you've got files that you wanted to share with people, so if I minimize this, you can drag and drop those straight into the chat, and you'll see that the file has been added straight away down the bottom there. It hasn't posted it to your chat area yet until you hit the send icon, bottom right-hand corner. And now it's made available to everybody, and you can click on it. So sharing files with your cohort, really easy, just drag and drop. You can actually locate the files if you need to, which would involve, let me see if I can find it. There's supposed to be tooltips, as in if I hover my mouse over the top, it tells me what it is. There we go. Tiny little box underneath that blank piece of paper icon that says file. I could click on that and then choose my computer, for example, and browse for the file. So you can do all of that, or just drag and drop is the easiest way to go. Drag and drop straight into the chat. We also get a confirmation here as well about our recording. If we've forgotten that we're recording it all, we can see in the chat that the recording is on. Right, the other features that we have in the chat is that when you have a message that comes in, either one that you've sent or one from someone else, you'll see when you hover that there's also a speech bubble with a plus sign next to it, which means you can do inline responses. So I can reply specifically to that particular point that's being made there with text, and you'll see that it then indents and situates the commenting underneath in line. So I can write new comments that will each get their own new line, or you can respond in line. You'll also see within the tool set, we have the same feature. We have a text editor, a fairly basic text editor that if you click on that first panel with the pencil, gives you a few more options: bold, italics, underline, strike through, some text coloring options if you want them, hyperlinks if you want them. To be honest, if you're going to put links into your chat, all you need to do is paste them. You don't really have to worry about using a link button. So if I was talking about, let's say, like the Herald. Okay, so there's a web page from a newspaper and I was wanting to share that with the students. I could literally just go paste that. And then you can see it's converted it to a hyperlink on the spot that you can then click on and open it. So again, links to web pages, you don't necessarily have to click on make a hyperlink, type in a hyperlink. You literally can just copy and paste. There's bulleting that's in there. There's numbering. There's a few basic formatting features that are available with that aspect of the chat. Next to that option, we also have the emojis section, hugely popular amongst some people, I guess, if you want to use the emojis, giving you access to a wide range, thousands and thousands of characters that people drop in, such as the ever popular toilet icon, for example, that people might end up dropping into their post for whatever reason. Emojis are not disabled, and that means that you can expect to see them in your chats, is what I'm trying to say for you. Some of them are less than flattering. Some of them are things like smiley faces. But once it's kind of the floodgates are opened, you can expect to see emojis of every type appearing in your chats in your Zoom session. Okay, what else have we got? There is if I hover over the tooltip for that last section, a screenshot option, which is the little sort of rectangular field with a plus sign next to it. And if we click on that, you'll see you get a crosshair. And at that point, you could take a screenshot of anything on any screen. And once you've taken that screenshot and hit capture, it then posts that. Now I'll just show you again what that looks like. If I hit the screenshot option, it gives me a crosshair. I can literally take left click and drag any section of any screen and hit capture. You can do other squiggly things to it if you want to, but to be honest, you're usually hitting capture and then it posts it directly in the chat. That's what the screenshot option does. Again, it's not shared until you hit the envelope to share. And now in your chat, you can see the screenshot. So it's a quick way to get images shared in your chat in line. That's the screenshot feature. Apart from those four features, you'll find as the host that you have several dots next to the chat pod that will give you the ability, if you wanted to grab the chat, which is save chat. That'll give you a text file. But you can also choose, for example, to merge the chat pod back to your meeting window. So when you saw before with my Zoom panel, which now has no chat and no participants shared, just the box with the window. If I want that to be part of the same thing, I can click on the three dots and merge to the meeting window. And you can see that the chat is now joined to my one Zoom screen. And I want to do the same with the participant window, which I can find If you forget where it is, just click on participants down the bottom in your toolbar. There it is. And I want to merge that as well, which is accessed through those three dots. Merge to the meeting window. And you can see now I have participants up the top, chat down the bottom. You can drag out the size of either of those areas if you want to, up and down, also left and right. You can drag that out so that your interface is customizable to your preference, if you want it smaller, bigger, etc. But for me, I like to keep all of those consolidated in the one area so that I don't have to go hunting for different pieces of it. Chat, participants, and my shared meeting area. I also have a meeting timer turned on, so I can see, for example, how long my session has going. And that's configurable for either showing how long the meeting's been running for, or when you set up the meeting and said it's for an hour, it'll work as a countdown for you, which I think is quite handy at times as well. Now that timer function, I'll have to chase up where I turned that on, and I'll send you the information. I'll email both of you with it. But it is quite a useful feature for me. The actual view that you get in a Zoom meeting is also configurable. Up in the top right-hand corner here, we have the view button, and you'll see as the host, like every participant in a Zoom meeting can control what they want the meeting to look like. So I usually have gallery turned on, which means I see the webcams of every participant in here. Up to a limit, like I think, for example, it's about 16 that it shows by default, and then you have to start scrolling through everyone's webcams, etc. That's the gallery view. The speaker view literally just shows the person doing the talking to you, or one of the other webcams. So it's showing Ruth at the moment, for example. But if Catherine, if you're able to unmute, you'll notice that as soon as you start saying anything at all,
Hello?
it changes to you.
Yeah.
Right. So that's exactly how the speaker view works. It focuses on who's doing the talking. So I will switch this back to gallery view. The immersive view is kind of a gimmick. I'll show you very briefly what that involves, but effectively you can choose things like a panel or a boardroom, and then anyone that has their webcam turned on you'll then see yourselves, because I'm sharing my screen. If I stop sharing my screen, can you see what that looks like with all of us in here? Again, where you position, a little bit gimmicky, but maybe again, it can be quite fun to change things like this, particularly with smaller sizes. The immersive view also has other options like, let's go with the painting gallery, for example, where we're now all pictures on the wall in the gallery. There's a range of them for you to play with, I guess. So again, I quite like it for particular instances and scenarios. The more students you have in the meeting, of course, the less likely that's going to be applicable. But there is a function in there for, let's try this one for up to 25 users. We'll wait for it to load. Okay, so then you can get your lecture theatre going. If I share my screen again, I'm going to drag this across. Not sure if you can see this or not, but what it lets me do with that shared view, I don't think I can change it. I can actually change where those people are sitting. For example, if you can see me doing that, I can change where Catherine's sitting, for example. Right, so as a host, you have a lot of power in a Zoom room. You can also change the size of their image if you needed to, just by moving the crosshairs out. So that's the immersive view. There are a few options in there. By all means, have a play with them, but it can be quite amusing. I'm going to stop there for a second and see, does anyone have any questions or comments at that point before we keep going?
Thanks, Lachlan. So I have a question.
Go ahead.
So if I'm involved in a Zoom supervision, for example, for an exam, and as the host, if I wanted to talk to a student or my co-host privately, Can you please show me how to do that?
Privately. Well, you would be able to chat with them with direct messaging. If we have a look at the way that I was mentioning before in the chat area. Am I sharing my screen? I'm probably not. Let me share again. Right, so when we have our chat area, for example, you're able to change to the particular person you want to send a message to, and you can type to them directly and only they can see that. But if you're talking about actual just communication, just the two of you, you'd need to make sure you're the only two people in the room. And one way to do that, for example, it's a really good question, is making sure that you remove everyone else from the meeting room. So, for example, you as the host could turn around and, for example, we could put Catherine in the waiting room, and then only you and I would be in the room. But another option that we have in here under your security settings down the bottom is that you also have the ability to lock the meeting. And if you lock the meeting, it means no one can enter the room. Whoever's in there is in there. So if you need a private conversation with someone and making sure that no one else can come in, that's how you do it. Click on the security option and you lock the meeting. Okay, and then that way it's guaranteed that it's just those two people in there, and no one else is able to come in, go out. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because those sorts of situations can crop up and people do get quite worried about whether someone's going to jump in or not.
Yeah.
So between controlling the recording that's happening and also making sure that the meeting's locked, etc., if you need to, are two good ways of controlling that. When we talk about confirmations in the interface as well in Zoom, this is a good opportunity for me to broaden that out. This is called the Zoom taskbar down the bottom. We can see you're able to move this to some extent if you want to, but I usually have mine down the bottom. I also have it always visible. I don't mind if participants see that when I'm sharing my screen, but I want to be able to see those options and not go hunting for them. And sometimes there's an auto hide feature, which can be quite frustrating to try and find your Zoom settings. If we look at the top left-hand corner, for example, we'll see we also have a confirmation that cloud recording is happening. I can pause that recording up here if I need to. And that's usually quite valid if you're trying to share media that you might not have copyright options to. So if you're talking about YouTube clips, for example, if I wanted to have YouTube playing back in my meetings, I would probably be telling everyone, right, I'm going to play this clip, so we'll just pause the recording and keep going with that. That's usually the most common scenario, is when you're playing back media that you don't have the rights to. Yep. So whilst we're looking at sharing, go back into our share screen. There are lots and lots and lots of options in here. By far and away, the most common scenario that we get is people wanting to share one of their screens. And I usually recommend that, to be honest, as your approach. There are lots and lots of other options for sharing application windows, for sharing PowerPoint, the application, or Word, the application. I really do recommend, even for advanced users of Zoom, don't bother with all of that. Just know which screen that you're going to be sharing and just dragging in and out the thing that you want to use. So for me, if I share my first screen, I usually make sure that I've got sound checked anyway if I'm playing back media. And that means whether I want to show you what's happening in Zoom, whether I want a particular document, so I might have a PDF that I particularly wanted to share with you to bring up. None of that matters, because it's whatever is on my screen is what the audience sees. So you're not losing track of what it is that the audience is actually engaging with. Maybe it means I want to share two things side by side, and that's fine. If I've just got a web page here, for example, that I could make half the size alongside my PDF, which is half the size. All I need to worry about is anything that's on this screen is what the audience can see. That's why I like the sharing of the screen option. I don't have to worry about keeping track of what's being shared. Just share your screen, and that way, knowing which monitor has the shared stuff on it and which monitor, if you've got a second monitor, you're keeping track of other things. So for me, for example, I'm watching you guys with the video meeting on my other monitor. So I keep my Zoom meeting detail over on this other screen and my shared stuff over here. So there's my shared workspace. And that's usually, for me, kind of the ideal delivery dynamic for Zoom is shared content over on one screen, monitor the Zoom meeting on the other. So I get the two. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay. All right, while we're looking at the Zoom interface, we'll continue on with this and then we're going to get into looking at the i2 site settings for Zoom in just a minute. What else can I show you in here? You'll notice that you as the host can left click and drag people around if you want to, the camera views. You also have some microphone and video options down the bottom. Clicking on them directly will mute them or turn them on and off. Right, so you can mute yourself. You can also change your input device. So quite often people, if they're using laptops, for example, will have the laptop mic being picked up, the internal laptop mic rather than the headset. People, you'll get grainy, horrible audio. It's usually a result of not selecting the right microphone. So for me, for example, I've got a webcam on top of my screen that has a microphone put into it. I can switch across to using that. And have you noticed the change in the quality of the audio as a result? Same sort of thing, right? So headset, which specializes in just the coming from my mouth, I can switch that and the quality is much better. If you're recording resources, for example, for your subject sites, make sure you're using a headset. Internal laptop mics, webcam mics, etc. The quality is always compromised. We also have, you can control where the audio is coming to, the output or the speaker. And for me, that's coming through my headset, but you can change it to other speakers if you've got external speakers. You can also do a test to make sure you can hear what that sounds like. Same with your video settings, but the video, apart from changing which webcam, for example, the one on top of my computer or the one across on my laptop over there, for example, and you can switch those backwards and forwards through the camera selection, but you'll also find that there are some options for changing your background. If you wanted to blur your background, this seems to be a really popular thing now in a lot of meetings, people blurring backgrounds. If you wanted to do that, it's in there. If you have a relatively plain kind of background going on behind you, like a single colored wall, for example, you could also use a feature called the virtual background, which will have an image put over the top behind you. You'll notice behind me, I have a green curtain that I can pull across. That creates a green screen behind me, and I can use all of those virtual backgrounds if I wanted to. But usually they require that you have single color at least behind you to use those features. There are video filters. Again, we're getting into gimmick kind of territory here, where I can do things like Lachlan with a funny colored reindeer face, for example, and I would look like that, or Lachlan the pig, for example. You can do all of these things. Lachlan wearing a COVID mask. It's hilarious, I'm sure. Wearing a mask, all that kind of stuff. Under the filters, there are many, many, many different features. You'll also find you have the ability to use things like avatars, which would have Lachlan as a cat, for example, which I'm sure. Let's see what that looks like. I have not looked at this feature yet. I am somewhat amazed. Does that look like it does to me in this window to you? It has me as a talking cat. That is spectacular. I'll be playing with that later on. I'm going to turn off avatars and the hat, get rid of the filters. Yeah, I had not seen that before. Okay, so if you really want to freak out your students, come into the meetings as a talking cat for the entire session and see how that goes for you. Right, the security button we touched on before. As a way of being able to lock meetings. It also allows you to do things like turning your waiting room off and off, on and off. Also locks down what participants can and can't do. By default, I don't have participants able to share their screens. I usually promote the people to co-host that I want to be able to share screens if they need to. But if you want it on for everybody, you can certainly turn that on through the security protocols. Other things like who can chat, whether people can mute themselves, unmute themselves, turn on webcams or not. All of those features are toggleable through the security panel. That's the button down the bottom. Participants we know about, we've got it happening over here. There is a polling tool in Zoom. It has basic polling types, multiple choice, short answer, etc. if you want to get into that. We cover that in another one of the PD sessions we run on audience engagement tools. It may very well be the one that I'm running next week. I can't quite recall, but we look at tools like Mentimeter, Zoom polling, and the whiteboard tool, etc. in those sessions. But you are able to see those features in your taskbar as long as you are the host. So other people can't see them, the host can. Share screen we've been looking at already. Pausing the recording, stopping the recordings, you get it up the top. You also get it in your taskbar if you need to. There is a captioning feature in Zoom, which is toggleable by every user. So it's not just you as the host, but everybody can turn it off and on their own view. When you turn it on, it actually, now you'll see the text coming down the bottom of the screen while I'm talking. It's populating speech to text as we're going. That can be turned off and on, but it's an accessibility feature that's available to every user as long as they have it turned on in their Zoom settings, in the Zoom portal. Remember, we looked at the Zoom backend settings. In the Zoom portal, this is one of the options that people can either turn off and on. It's turned on by default, I believe. But if you can't find it, just go looking in your Zoom settings for captions. If you do a search for captions, you'll find this particular setting. These are also captured when you make your recording in the back of Zoom. And that actually probably provides us with a good segue to go and look at what we can do with our Zoom recordings when we make them. So I will turn off my captions by hitting the arrow and disabling captions. Okay. The reactions option before I get out of here next to it is again like your emojis, but it gives you a condensed list. And this is another way of providing people to get feedback instantly, saying if everyone's okay with what I've covered so far, can you click on the reaction for give me a thumbs up, for example, in the reactions thing. And when you click on those, it will appear inside your video image up there. And also in the participant panel, you can see next to my name, there's a thumbs up there as well. So you get that kind of quick feedback or cue from people. They also have the option in there to be able to raise their hand. If you've got any questions, I'll get you to raise your hand and then I'll stop what I'm saying and get to your question, for example. And again, you can see webcam, profile picture, there's the raise hand, and also next to my name in the participant panel. So you can see why I think the participant panel is so important in a Zoom meeting, because it gives you a quick kind of snapshot of anyone with feedback to you quite quickly without having to, I suppose, keep detailed track of what's happening in the chat pod. I can also then lower my hand and it gets rid of that. All right, let's have a look at recordings and then we'll spend our last sort of 10 minutes in the subject science looking at that. So you'll recall before we were looking at the Zoom CSU Zoom portal, which we access through charlessturt.zoom.us and sign in. When we look at recordings that we've made inside the Zoom portal, it's captured for us under the recordings area as long as we were the host of the meeting in question. It'll bring up that list of recordings. You'll see there's a section here about local recordings and cloud recordings. By far and away, I would suggest that you always use record to the cloud unless you have a very, very good reason for recording locally. Once we have recordings that are in there, they'll be date listed. You can search for them, but if I'm going to, let's go into a recording that was made here. And you'll see that it gives me the details of the recording. I can click on play here if I need to, but underneath it also gives me specific type or elements of the recording that I can download if I want to. So if I want the transcript, over here on the right, I can download the transcript. I can get a link to the transcript. I can delete the transcript. If I just want the recording with the shared speaker view, I can get the link to it. I can download it. I can delete it. So you get those options underneath the recording. And these are all settings that you set up with your recordings. What type of things do you want captured in your recordings? I always get a shared speaker with a shared screen with the speaker view, just the audio track if I need the MP3 file, the transcript, and the chat. Those are the 4 things that I have when I make my recordings. But if I wanted to distribute that to students, it would be as simple as me going, copy the link, and then distributing that somewhere. So for example, I might provide that in the chat, and then you could click on it. You might send it in an email if you needed to. This is a way of distributing Zoom recording links manually. When we get into the subject side in a second, we're going to look at how we do that automatically. But when we actually want to change something about a Zoom recording, like editing, you would have to click on the actual recording itself, this icon with the play icon here. It opens it up in a browser window. And what we get in here underneath, this is quite a complex screen. Okay, so the recording's on. I think we'll get fantastic. You get Lachlan talking there. So I've paused that. Now, as the host, when you come into a recording like this, you'll notice underneath that there is a scissors icon over here that says trim. What that's going to do when we click it is highlight with a blue continuum our recording, where you can drag the beginning and the end of the recording to the parts that you like. You can keep hitting play to see which things are actually going to be included in that or not, but you can adjust the start and finish points with a continuum and then hit the word trim. That will then change the recording and save it with that updated editing. The question that we get asked normally with Zoom is, what if I want to change parts in the middle? Or what if I want to do multiple trims? You can certainly do that. And the way that it works is you make this included area as small as you like, and then outside it, you'll see a plus. Clicking on the plus, you can have as many included or excluded sections as you like. It's fiddly. I'm going to say that from the outset. So really, most people, this scenario is going to be something along the lines of, I needed to adjust the start and the finish points, and there was a section in the middle that I need taken out. If that's the case, you're going to have to find that section in the middle. If I remove each of these bits. So let's say, for example, starting with all of it highlighted and included, blue means it's included, right, as our standard rule. Let's say, for example, that I was unhappy about that. And I knew that at, well, I don't know, 15 minutes into the recording or something, there was a bit that I wanted excluded. You can see when I'm dragging at the timer that's there above it. This relies on you knowing when the bit that you want excluded happens. So if I know that at 21 minutes and 50 seconds, there's something in there that I don't want, and it goes for 20 seconds, I can now plus in another section that starts at, let's say, 24 minutes and goes to the end. If I click trim now, it's going to exclude that gray section in the middle. So you can trim them out, but you need to know the times for the things that you want removed from the recording. And that way you do your beginning up to what you want included and then stop, then click outside that and add in another area. So that's what I mean by fiddly. Most video recording packages, to be honest, are a lot easier to use in terms of the editing. But when you click trim, it's going to process the recording and the link that you've provided to anybody in the past will only play the thing that you have adjusted. So it's automatically updated. You don't have to re-provide the link. You don't have to do any of that. It makes that change to all of the recordings. And if they were to download it or watch the link, they get the new version. Okay, so that's now updated. There are other features with Zoom recordings that I'm not getting into today. Another learning management. And that is that those are to do more with these other elements, like the fact that you can generate a summary automatically from the recording. This is artificial intelligence at work. It will generate a summary of the meeting. It grabs the transcript, for example, and then determines if you like, you can highlight things. And if you highlight them in the transcript, it will put those together into what Zoom calls a highlights reel. Again, kind of gimmicky for my use of this tool, but there's added functionality to the recordings. If you want to go and have a play with those, you can put those together from the recordings area. All right, let's spend our last 5 minutes looking at subject sites, or I'm never going to get there. When we use Zoom within our subject sites, it looks like this in the navigation bar. It's usually called the online meeting tool, Zoom. This academic has renamed it to Online Tutorial Room, but you're looking within the subject community area for a tool that says Online Meeting. And it is integrated with your personal Zoom account. This tool is basically very popular because it means students and teachers are all going into the same space to access their Zoom meeting information. And after the fact, not only do they get a list of all the meetings that have happened and their dates, you can get hold of an attendance report if you need one to see who was in the meeting, who wasn't in the meeting. You also can get access to all of the recordings that were made from those meeting rooms, all captured automatically in the same area. So it means that you don't have to automatically provision recording links or any other information to students. They get everything from inside this particular area. And that means they can watch the recordings if they want to, or they can download them all from within this same shared online meeting space. And the process for making those meetings inside this tool, when you come in here, again involves using the schedule new meeting option. So just like we did in the back end of Zoom, if I was to come in here and click on schedule a new meeting, it's going to ask me for that same information. The name for the meeting, don't worry about descriptions. No one can ever read them. When is it going to happen? So if I wanted to say that I'm having a Zoom meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock, it goes for an hour. This is the question. Is it happening every week? If it is, we click on recurring. How often? It could be recurring every week. And we know that it was happening. Well, we hope it knows, because we were saying that it's going to happen on a Wednesday. So I don't want it to happen on a Tuesday. Recur every week on the Wednesday. And in fact, you can then determine whether or not you finish it at a particular date. Maybe you have the end of session, for example, as your intended date. Or if, for example, you knew that the session had 14 weeks in it, you might say, I'm going to have this happen for 14 weeks. We don't turn on registration on our Zoom meeting, so avoid that one. You'll see the waiting room's turned on by default. All of those same options that we have on in our Zoom portal will be visible to you here. And that includes the automatic recording aspect. So again, remember, do you want them to be able to join before you, or do you want the meetings recorded automatically? One or the other. When we choose advanced options here, you don't really have to worry about this section, because the way this integration works is that anyone who has access to your subject site who is not a student, so your markers, your co-teachers, other people that get added in, they will be able to access the Zoom meetings as an instructor. That's how the integration works. You don't have to add them yourself. As long as they have access to the subject site, they will be able to come in here and use this meeting. Once we save this, you will see straight away inside the Zoom meeting room, we can use these breadcrumbs up the top to jump backwards and forwards inside this tool, by the way. So if I click on that, it takes me back to the subject site. If I jump back into the Zoom area, what we're now going to see in our upcoming meetings is all of those dates that we've had. We've got a recurring meeting that we said happens 14 times. It has the dates. The students now have their schedule for when their meetings are, for example, their lectures, the topic. They can come in here and click on this and join it. You're also able to delete them as the host. And after each of those meetings occur, assuming that you've recorded them, they will then appear in the Cloud Recordings tab. So that means students who have access to the subject site can find out all of their meeting information, the dates, click on the links to join them, click on Cloud Recordings to access their recordings afterwards. It's a one-stop shop. It just requires that you spend the time scheduling the meeting properly at the start of the session. You're probably going to need to delete some of these, for example, if it's the session break. If you come up and say, right, mid-session break happens and these particular dates, delete, and you remove those from that schedule as well. And then all of your meeting links are done, ready to roll. And if you've got either auto recordings on, they'll appear ready there for you. Otherwise, you're going to need to manually remember to turn on the recordings. All of that hinges around that setting of whether you want students to be able to go into the meetings before you or not. So maybe you create a meeting in here that's ongoing just for students to use as like a group work or consultation space or a drop-in space or whatever. You could certainly do that. You could schedule a meeting that we call student drop-in, whatever. And when we set it, we can then have it as recurring, and under recurrence, you could choose no fixed time. At that point, this will just be a meeting that they can use indefinitely whenever they want to, for whatever they want to. Once we create that space and hit save, wait for it to update, we can now see that there is a recurring student drop-in meeting for them to use that they can come in here and join whenever they need to. So you can make all sorts of different types of Zoom rooms within the tool in the subject site. It's really very, very powerful, and it will mean other instructors that get added to the site, guest lecturers, etc., that come in, will all be able to come in through the online meeting item in the subject site, join the meetings, get access to the recordings, and you can use it for obviously different purposes, lectures, drop-ins, consultations, whatever you need to. You can schedule them all in here. But once the date passes, assuming there is a date, this recurring one, remember we set as no fixed time, so there's no date. But if there is a date and it passes, it will then move into the previous meetings tab. It'll come off that list on the upcoming tab, move into previous, and then you can go in there afterwards and have a look at the report. And you'll be able to see how many people turned up, who they were, how long they stayed for. And if you need that document as evidence for whatever reason, you can export your attendee list from here as well. So it's quite powerful, the subject integration for Zoom. I do thoroughly endorse it because it means that you don't have to manually provision information to students somewhere else, in announcements, in an area of the subject site, in a table somewhere showing dates and times and things. It's all automatically provisioned inside this tool, and it just makes it a lot less confusing for students trying to find things as well. Anyway, we're at time, and I realize that I've rambled on about different parts of Zoom. I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm happy to hang around for a minute if you have specific questions that some of this has triggered at all about the 3 areas of Zoom we've looked at today, which was the desktop application, the CSU Zoom portal, and the CSU Zoom integration in Blackboard. So in our subject sites in Interact 2. Otherwise,